Welcome to General Principles, where we explore alternative perspectives on entrepreneurship with the makers and creators who inspire us. I'm Anna McGovern, and with my dear friend Daniel Zhang,
Hello.
we talk to Marie Dollé, an experienced media researcher, digital strategist, and writer on media tech. In this episode, we dive into newsletters, peek into the trends in the media business, and learn how to build the best content curation pipeline.
Hi, Marie. Very
Hi.
nice to have you on today. Can you tell the audience a bit about your story?
Hi, Danielle. So I'm French. I live in Paris. I worked for 10 years in a media research institute that's called Cantor Media. And for the past 3 years now, I've been working for a French public investment bank, helping startup raise funds. So I think that's basically the official part. And then just like many people right now, and with the COVID crisis and things like that, I've launched my Substack in French and English during the first lockdown. I have a lot of things going on, like around passion economy.
So how did you get into the passion economy as a subject, and what prompted you to write in a newsletter rather than, say, a blog or any other format?
Well, there's something actually pretty funny is that I've been writing for French media for the past 5 years. And I always thought I was smart because I was, building my personal brand and that I was doing things just the perfect way. And during lockdown, actually, what happened is that I had this paper I wrote. It was actually on when Facebook bought Jiffy. How would you say that in English? Jiffy? Jiffy. I think it's like that. And I wanted that piece to go out like really quickly because it was like a topical subject. And the media, which I write for usually, told me, yeah, we have a lot of things going on, so we'll publish it in 2 weeks. And so I ended up publishing it, and saying, well, I don't want it, to be published in 2 weeks. I want it to be published now. So what can I do? I didn't want to publish on LinkedIn. I didn't want to go on Medium. So now I said, okay, let's go on Substack, set it up in like 2 minutes, and there you go. So something I realized, and I think is really important for anyone out there that's writing currently, is that building an audience is smart, but being wise is actually, being smart is writing, is building your personal brand. But I think being wise is really building your audience, because what my newsletters have brought me in 5 months is like 10 times more than what writing in other print publication has brought me in 6 years. I couldn't have imagined like just writing under my own name and building my own audience would bring me, in comparison to writing even, like 3-4 articles per month for other print publications. So that's actually something that's pretty stunning and that I actually discovered like recently.
And with your current strategy of building an audience, did you already have a pre-existing audience, or have you established this network kind of fresh, straight off from once you started writing the newsletter?
I actually had kind of already something, because I had been writing for 5 years. So I had, maybe 7,000 or 8,000 followers on Twitter. And when I told people I was launching my Substack, I had like 200 or 300, people that subscribed straight away. So it did help, obviously. But I think if I take the English example, because I've always written in French and I'm French and I hardly write in English. And what happened is that after a couple of months, I think 2 months after I launched my Substack in French, I had actually an American VC that tweeted and said that she loved my articles and that she used the Google translator to translate it. And obviously I thought that was pretty amazing, because French people often read American people, but vice versa is not often true. I don't think there are many American people that translate French people, or any other country actually, And so I thought that was pretty amazing. And I thought I'll launch it in English and see how it goes. And what's interesting is that I have both newsletters and they don't have absolutely the same patterns. Like French is like constantly growing and growing very high. I've got like in 5 months over 2,500 subscribers, but English is complicated because like discovery and reaching out is much more complicated than France. So obviously the fact that I had a pre-existing audience in France helped much more than the English, which is taking a lot of time. But I think it's about being patient and delivering and just hanging on in there. And I'm sure it will eventually take, I hope so.
Do you think part of the reason the English one might have been slower to grow is because there's a lot more content out there in English language than there is perhaps in French? Or do you think it is just discovery is really bad?
I think I think both your questions are actually pretty spot on, because definitely there's much more really good content in English, because I mean there's more. That's the truth. I think it's also because just cultural, because I think American people have been, and Indian people, because I have a lot of subscribers that are Indian, have been into this lifelong learning thing much more than French people, where diplomas are still very important, even if it's something that's changing. And so people just assume that you had like this great degree and this very good university, and that you didn't necessarily need to like read technology articles or things like that because you had gone to a great school. And I think, yeah, that's the cultural aspect is also very important.
So why did you say no to Medium initially? Was it that you just didn't have kind of ownership of an audience that you could grow, or what was it that put you off Medium as your medium?
It's complicated, Medium. It's like either you have this kind of paywall or not. I didn't take the time to like think it through, but what I remember is that I had written this piece that took me like maybe 10 hours, which really worked well in France. And it was under a paywall, and I ended up with like 20 people viewing it. So there's something about the discovery in Medium that doesn't work out, at least for new people. It's a bit like, you know, TikTok. I mean, TikTok, you can be no one and you get there. Anyone can be like a star almost from, you know, day one. I'm exaggerating, but that's the sense. Whereas, you know, when you come on LinkedIn, when you come on Instagram, I mean, you need to have an audience, it's followers, and that's actually the first thing they ask you. Substack is easy. You have a newsletter, but it's public. Anyone can see it. It's actually pretty well ranked in search engines. That's something I've noticed. So I think it's easier. I mean, it's discoverability is easier, even though I think they have a lot of things to improve internally, like to find other good newsletters. That's an issue they have to work on.
Well, Substack has recently kind of released a discovery feature. I don't know if you came across that yet.
Yeah, I was kind of afraid of that, because I was like, if people switch to that and unsubscribe from the inbox, I think you could actually lose some readerships, because initially when I started with newsletters, I used a tool that's called Stoop Inbox. It's basically like an app where you subscribe and get all your newsletter in the same place. So, I mean, it's great. Basically, I just never read my newsletters, you know. So at some point, I just like unsubscribed from all that and got back into my newsletter in my inbox. And that's the thing, is if there's a revival of newsletter, it's just because there was no algorithms and you could reach people. So if you add like other features like that, I mean, I think it's good for discovering you, but not if you're going to change the way people that are already subscribed to you.
Right. I'm not too sure what they are kind of heading with in the direction with the new discovery feature, but I suppose that they're trying to help you find similar things to what you are already reading and promote other related writers who you possibly would quite like.
Yeah, I'm not too sure if it's just like saying, well, you're subscribed to these newsletters, this one you could like that one. I mean, that's a good idea. But then if they want to change the reading habits, I'm not going to like that. But, you know, again, I think it's still a little bit weird. It's like the feature they introduced a couple of months ago, having on Twitter, you can see who has a newsletter that's linked to their Twitter account.
Right.
In some way, it can be great, but like, for instance, my Twitter account is linked to both my newsletters, like French and English. And so I had a lot of people, English, that subscribed to the English and the French and first received the French. And so I had a lot of unsubscribers because obviously they don't speak French. So see, I think there's like some scenarios they didn't take into account. And the other thing is, like, if you want to have a newsletter and maybe have it like in an anonymous kind of way or not linked to your profile, I mean, like, bam, that's it. You know, I mean, it's no longer private because, right. So I'm not like 100% like sure about that.
Yeah, right. And you mentioned before also with the newsletters having a English and a French one where they kind of cover slightly different content pieces and they are aimed at a different audience. My question is, there's a whole kind of French culture that I think a lot of the English speaking world isn't that aware of. In the entrepreneurial space, for example, there's the family, and in fashion, there's a lot of independent brands, which has a lot more awareness in the English speaking world. But what do you think is a French perspective that is not so necessarily well covered in the English speaking world in terms of the media and the internet?
That's a good question. Like from French, maybe I don't have like an example right now, but like if you take Europe, if you take like countries like Estonia, they're really good like with education because they're in advance in like those matters. There are some countries that are really strong in some things like Nordic countries with like mobility. But I think something that would actually be very interesting is that there are some tools now that are being developed, like browsers like Toucan. It's a tool that allows you to translate directly in your browser and learn new languages. I think that if tomorrow, like Substack could allow you to discover any newsletter, whatever the language, and just have it translated and understand, like from a multicultural like experience, that would be amazing. Because I speak 4 languages. I lived all my life abroad. And when I do curation and things like that, I actually read some Italian media, Spanish, Indian, Australian, French. And sometimes you find things you won't find elsewhere. So I think that would really be great.
Do you think that translating it would be enough? Do you think you don't need that kind of cultural understanding of whichever country you're dealing with to really understand the pieces and get the value from that? Do you think just translate would be enough?
No, I agree. That's a fair point. I think in some cases it would, but not necessarily. Like on my pieces, when I translate from French to English, it's never a literal translation. It's a cultural translation, because sometimes if I talk about some companies in France, I won't necessarily translate it with those companies. Or if I do, I will really set the context and explain how it's relevant and what does that mean in French culture. So obviously if you would translate that, that's maybe something you'd lose, but sometimes it could work.
If you were trying to understand, say, education, and you didn't have any experience in Estonian cultural understanding, how would you go about really understanding what that space is like beyond just the Google translation?
Curiosity. I think it just comes back to curiosity. When I read something and I don't understand, straight away I go on Google, and you always find someone that knows what it is in your own language. So yeah, curiosity at this point. Maybe tomorrow we'll have, with artificial intelligence, really cultural aspects that, like, I don't know, some box or something that will tell you this is something like trending in France and this is what it is. But today we don't have it, obviously.
And so obviously amongst the history, there's a lot of bundling and then debundling and bundling again. Where do you think we are in this cycle in just the internet in general, but then also specifically how we're going to bundle newsletters to get more value?
Right now, so Greg Isenberg talked a lot about Reddit. I really like Reddit. It's a social network I like a lot. And I think there's a lot of things to do around the unbundling of Reddit, a lot of business opportunities. And what I like about that is that you start where there's a community. So building something where the community is much easier than launching a product and building a community on top of it. So I like that idea of like Reddit. Otherwise, newsletters, I think there will be some bundling, but I'm not 100% sure of that right now. That's not what I see in like 2021, like as a like big trend. LinkedIn unbundling, I've seen so many companies, LinkedIn has 4 verticals, which is hire, learn, network, and marketing. And I've started mapping them out, and I think I'm over like 150 companies so far that are basically unbundling LinkedIn. So this is going to be fascinating. But I think it's linked to the current state of the workspace and how with the COVID crisis, everything is changing. The way we work, the fact that now you can search for jobs abroad or just anywhere. And yeah, I think it's also contextual and it will definitely make huge changes. So LinkedIn unbundling, that's very interesting.
On the point of newsletters and unbundling happening in that space, when we kind of think about YouTube, you could say that YouTube is unbundling TV because people are able to create content direct to the audience without necessarily needing a broadcaster. But in terms of newsletters, anyone could write a newsletter. On Substack, you could create a newsletter and have it published to the entire world. But there is a big value in having very high quality journalism and news. Do you think, from your experience in the Media Research Institute, that this is something which is not necessarily a good feature of unbundling? Like, do you think the damage done to newspapers as they lose subscribers towards newer forms of media would actually change the landscape of how we deal with factual information and what we can trust?
That's a good question. I think like traditional media will always be here. I think that there's interesting things happening in the like traditional media landscape. And as far as I'm concerned, I had this period where for maybe 2-3 months, I was only reading newsletters. And now, I mean, I'm still reading newsletters, but I think I have like maybe 20-30 newsletters, which are like read in depth, but I'm back to traditional media because they're evolving. Like it's getting more personal. You read things that, I mean, they're journalists, so they're really good at it. I think at some point, maybe the connection with the readers was a little bit diluted, but like they know they're having competitions. I think they have understood how the things were changing and how you had to change and evolve. Business Insider buying Morning Brew is a big deal. It's like traditional media, like starting to understand that things are happening and that either you move on fast or things are gonna break. So actually, I think there's some really interesting things to be seen in the media space. So I'm actually pretty excited because the creator economy will actually make everything, I think, improve. And next year, I'm really looking forward to what media is going to do.
Do you have any predictions what you think media will do next year?
They have like more budget most of the times that like creators. So interesting formats like in storytelling. I've been reading a lot of trend reports these past days, and like the looks and everything is wow, like the storytelling, the graphics, and everything's really good. So I think they're bringing some entertainment back in it. And I was talking to Mike Donegal from Subtext. It's a SMS company, but it's SMS marketing, like new generation. It's not just about sending mass SMS. They have developed a service which allows you to answer back to one person. So you're basically having the reach of mass texting, but you can have one-to-one relationships with people answering back. And it's funny how, they're working with like several media in the audio space. So, podcasters are doing like some engagement through SMS. And he also mentioned some media that are doing e-commerce now through SMS. Like I think he mentioned BuzzFeed or things like that. So yeah, I think they're going to get creative, and yeah, I'm excited about that. I think he also told me that Protocol Media, which is a media I absolutely love. I mean, I love what they do. They're very innovative. I mean, in-depth stories, fresh analysis, it's really good. And they've signed a deal also with Substack. So I guess it's going to be interesting because we're going to realize that newsletters they'll probably like be a phenomenon of like newsletter fatigue. And I think that there will be new things and something around SMS, definitely, like taking things back and just giving it a new twist. So that'll be interesting.
Do you think we're close to newsletter fatigue now? And do you think overall newsletters or SMS would win out?
I think there is starting to be a kind of fatigue, but the good thing is that it's easy to launch a newsletter. It's very easy. I mean, anyone can do it. But it's not as easy to be consistent with a newsletter and to be here 6 months afterwards. So I think that at some point the craze is going to like calm down and we'll have just the good newsletters, or at least the one people being consistent. And I think SMS can be seen as, like, I'm not going to say an alternative, but maybe something complementary. You see that a lot around DTC brands, which, I mean, I've seen a lot of them that offer SMS and newsletters, but for different approach. So there's this pet food brand that I like a lot because it's very original. It's like holistic pet food brand. It's called Maev. And they have this SMS feature for horoscopes. Well, they actually call that dogoscopes because it's for horoscopes with people and their dogs. So each of them has one, I guess. I mean, I haven't tried it. I don't have dogs, but yeah, that's what I understood. And then they have their newsletter, with information, and, and actually they have a blog, which is pretty good. Distribution is something key for content. I think there's this quote I like a lot that says, if content is king, distribution is King Kong. So anything, any way you can find to repurpose content, repackage it, find other distribution model is important. You should spend as much time distributing it than you spend creating, which, I mean, I obviously don't do, but I know I should.
Yeah, I think the distribution factor provides like a bigger vector in terms of how much impact your content can create. But let's move on to a little bit on social. You wrote a while back on celebrity thinkers. And even when we're talking about the new types of creators, in a way, they are a bit of like the new A-list celebrities. Charlie D'Amelio, she's only 16. She's very popular on TikTok and has a bigger audience on TikTok than, say, Rihanna on Instagram. But one of the things that I have been a little bit interested in is with these new type of creators and with these new type of D2C brands, there is less of a quality control. With, say, media brands, there is an editor who makes sure that the fact is right. There's less conflicts of interest where someone owns a stock in this company and can't write on that, etc., etc. With the traditional retail brands, you have a kind of brand and trust in this company that has been around for years and years, that they won't release a faulty product. That doesn't need to be the same for a D2C brand. There's no need to establish a new trust because you can create a brand so easily. Do you think that this is an issue that is not very well addressed, or do you think it's not a problem and that the creator economy will evolve in quality as it goes on?
Definitely, I think it's going to be a problem for the creator economy, because depending on whether you're, writing a newsletter, people don't necessarily know your ethics. It's not like when you're a journalist and you have, like, I mean, it's your full-time job. So I think it will be an evolving problem. I don't know how we're going to address this. I think it's about teaching people to be cautious, to, double check things. But I mean, when you're reading something, if you're reading 30 newsletters, are you going to really like check every single link or things like that? No, obviously not. So yeah, it is a problem. I don't have the solution, but I think it will definitely be a problem for the creator economy. And then there's also like some shifts happening, which in some way are interesting, but that can also rise some problems. So I'll give you an example, like advertising. Okay, if you take advertising, we have traditional advertising, digital advertising, banners, that's okay. People don't like this type of advertising because it's intrusive, because it blocks, because it's unwanted, because we had this generation of like native advertising, okay, with like brands like Taboola and everything. So advertising that is contextual. I mean, I personally still don't find it good, but again, I guess that's just my taste. After native advertising, we had social networks with, I think, gamified advertising. When Snapchat launched their sponsored lenses, basically they said it was advertising that was cool. And when you think about it, like, it's so smart. It's like people are actually taking selfies and things like that with brand advertising on their faces, like Chipotle, like, lens, Nespresso, like mug lens. And basically people are advertising. It's something that really amazes me. But, from an ethics like point of view, it's kind of touchy when you think about it, okay? And now with the creator economy, you're having a new kind of advertising, which is, I mean, it doesn't have a name. I call it blended advertising. It's like take Morning Brew. I love Morning Brew. I love the stuff they pull out. It's always interesting, the tone of voice, everything. Okay. If you look at their advertising, it's like very complicated to see like the difference between the editorial and the advertising. I mean, sometimes I'm thrilled about reading the advertising. Dense Discover, which is another newsletter that I like, is the same. So I guess they have really good like click-throughs because they manage to give it to make it interesting. But then the writer is actually the one writing the editorial. So like from a journalist perspective, that's like, wow, you know, I mean, ethically speaking, a journalist would never want to do that. So I think it's better if people are interested in the advertising. But again, I'm a marketeer. I mean, I've worked in a media research institute. I like content marketing. So I think it's better to have this approach than have advertising that just blocks your navigation and that's useless, or at least that doesn't interest you.
Yeah, I think for the general case, your a better approach would be that blended advertising, because it's less intrusive than, say, a ad that pops up that you don't want. But I suppose where I'm a little bit cautious about and also thinking on is with, say, creators having a great number of influence with the fans that they do have, it's very easy for them to also manipulate, say, some bad market practices. Like, for example, some people who are very popular on Twitter, they could always say, Bitcoin is going to go up. Don't miss out. These are the institutions that are jumping in. You should buy now. And they are not necessarily regulated in the same way that a financial advisor would be, but they are still having a massive impact because they are providing information to a audience of people who would possibly be getting into something which they have very little information or transparency about. So
In France, things are starting to change. Like, I mean, I'm sure I don't know very well the legislation in other countries, but in France, basically now more and more, like if you have sponsored content, like influencers have to say it, they have to put a disclaimer. And I think things like that will evolve. So at some point, even in like videos, you'll have like, for advertising, because influencers are in some way like advertising, even some kind. I think you'll have some disclosures. And I think that will evolve. We're not there yet, but I think we'll be coming into that.
Do you think, though, that when you're, as a creator, even if you're not advertising a product in that specific instance, you might have had a pre-existing relationship with them, or you might want to have some sort of future relationship? There, you don't really need to disclose that you have this relationship because you're kind of very connected with the commercial aspect of it, you yourself, rather than indirectly through your organization. How do you think you can avoid having those conflicts of interest?
That's a good question. I think the boundary is like really blurry. So I guess it depends on the situation, but I'd have to give a concrete example. I don't have one there, but I think it's just about being smart about it and thinking it through. But obviously you're right. If you had a pre-existing and you're not necessarily talking about it, then you don't have to, because then otherwise you'd have like all your YouTube videos or podcasts with disclaimers, and that wouldn't be good. But I think it's just being smart about it and thinking and just trying to be honest, like with your audiences, but with yourself first.
And so I want to talk a bit more about trends now, because you've written quite a bit on discovering trends. For you, what makes a trend worth noting to you? What kind of trends do you find interesting
right now? Well, like some interesting trends I've seen right now. Well, I mentioned SMS, like SMS marketing revival. Another thing I find interesting is around like what I call expressionist apps. So, I mean, people have talked about, impressionism apps, but for me, it's more expressionism apps, because the difference is that expressionism is about, getting, feelings out there, so it's a different approach. And you have a lot of apps right now, like Facebook has launched, they have this small incubator team, like I think the Robin Hoods called it the Zook C6 team. And they have this app that's called Egg. There's another app that launched also that's called Monet, and it's about drawing dating. So a lot of people have been talking about it because the official launch was a couple of days ago, and it's actually pretty funny. So I mean, again, it's these types of apps like talk to Generation Z. So just a bit like TikTok. And there's also this other app that's called Trash, which is also very interesting. And that just, they got acquired by another brand just a couple of days ago. So I think it's interesting, like the creativity right now around there. That's one point. Another interesting trend I've seen recently, well, I mean, if you look at like D2C brands, it's funny because like, I mean, you can take just any topic, and like for instance, in food, you have like a big trend around upcycled food. You have also about like what I call like adaptogens. I don't know if you say that in English. I'm sorry for people listening to me. Sometimes I get the words wrong. It's not my first language, so apologies for that. It's like, mushrooms and things like that. You've got brands like Four Sigmatic that, bring mushrooms, adaptogenics and things like that into the food. And I think that we're in this space now where we're moving from like superfoods, like foods that are really healthy, to like food that make your mood better, because we're really getting into what I called like the mental empowerment. Like the biggest trend for me, like macro trend, is the fact that people are not well, like mental state of mind is not good, like lockdown, like people losing their jobs. And I think if I looked into Google, I think just in November, like 1.8 million people typed in anxiety. People have trouble sleeping. If you look at apps like Calm, Headspace, they're blowing up. And so I think there's going to be a lot of thing around what I call psychological brand and wellness approach. I think next year we'll have like content marketing around wellness that will be like, it will be the big topic. The other day I'm subscribed to Four Sigmatic. It's a brand that sells like coffee with mushrooms and all these adaptive foods. And they have this webinar. It was like a solstice sound bath. And I'm like, wow. I mean, there are some things I'm discovering right now. It's kind of, I think it's never been a better period to be like a weirdo right now, or someone with like weird taste or very curious people. Because I mean, my husband, when he opens the fridge, he's like, I mean, I have the feeling it's an R&D lab in here. And every day I come across new D2C brands with like things, and like CBD is blowing, and you're starting to see it everywhere, even in dog food. You have bath bombs. I mean, it's crazy. So mental empowerment and influencers, you have so many influencers out there around, like therapist. There's this Instagram account I love, that's My Therapist Notes or something like that. And it's basically the notes she's writing when she's in therapy. And I think she has like 40 or 50,000 subscribers. So I think it says a lot, on our mental health right now. And so really that's a macro trend, that any app and psychiatrist online, so anything around well-being will be a big hit in 2021, and probably more than that. That's like really a big trend. Other trends, I think
maybe diving a bit deeper into this wellness thing. So I'd say meditation's sure still a growing trend, but people are much more familiar with that. And CBD has also started to kick off. Are there any signals that you're getting that are smaller, maybe like the adaptogen one, that you think they could become bigger things that we all know of?
Everything that's like mystical, and that's actually not surprising, is that if you look back at history, when there's like types of crisis, money games and like everything around mysticism tend to grow, because people are trying to find comfort. So I don't know if you noticed, a couple of months ago, there was this trend around influencers giving out money, like in lottery. I found that actually pretty weird, but I was like, okay, so influencers are giving out money as like a charity lottery. There was then afterwards this New York Times post that basically explained that was a growth marketing technique. But it's funny, if you look at Snapchat, I think a couple of weeks ago, they announced they were launching Spotlight. It's a program for creators to reward creators. And what is interesting is that it's kind of a lottery. So it's funny how sometimes, you've got the zeitgeist, like things that are starting to trend. And then Snapchat is one of those organs that's really, really good into like getting it as a service, like zeitgeist product, like zeitgeist as a service. And, I think around lottery and things like that, we're going to see much more things. Horoscopes also is something that's actually interesting. You have this app that's called I think it's CoStar. Yeah, that's it. CoStar. It was downloaded 700,000 times last month. And you have, a lot of other horoscopes apps. And again, if you take the example of Snapchat, I think 2 weeks ago they announced that they were partnering with the horoscope editor of Cosmopolitan, and they were launching a horoscope feature on Snapchat. So like everything that's like a bit mystical, and that's, I mean, further than just horoscopes, like anything you can imagine, like sound bath, just what I mentioned, like, the stones that are supposed to heal you. So, I mean, there are a lot of products that could be developed around that, but that's also definitely a big trend.
Do you think that's people want something beyond them that's controlling their life so that they don't have to feel like the misfortunes of the times are to do with them? I mean, something like the lottery thing, always attractive to win money, but I think perhaps maybe it could be more popular now that people are just hoping for luck. They just need some good luck. That's kind of what they want at this point.
Exactly. And it's also that's also part of the reason why gaming rose during the lockdowns, because I think people needed a way to get out of their like real life and find something special or something where it could be different. There was this article that Rex Woodbury wrote. He's a VC and he has a Substack that's called Digital Native that is absolutely a must read. And he was talking about like metaverse, or at least like these new type of economies, because we're not right there. I can't talk really about metaverse, but maybe it's a first step. And he was talking about this girl that was, I guess she had she was waiting a heart transplant, and that, she went on to Roblox or I don't know, whatever platform. And she said basically she could be someone else. So, what's interesting is that there's a lot of anxiety. People are uncertain. I mean, in France, we're just out of our second lockdown. We'll probably have a third one. It's like it's never ending. And anything that can make you like kind of dream or get you out of your house, I think it's valuable. And that's, how trends are going to accelerate.
So do you think a lot of these things are just selling hope? I mean, most companies often do, but maybe more now that people are a bit more desperate for it.
Ultimately, yeah, agree. There's also something, I mean, macro trend, it's coming back, and right now is incentives. Seri Azou talks about the participatory economy, and I find that very interesting, is the fact that more and more we realize that the advertising or the models we had are broken. The fact that Facebook basically buys your attention and sells your information, or at least uses it to leverage on advertising. And we're seeing more and more alignment between consumer and between brands or creators. So you have some creators now, I mean, you have some startups that are emerging like Scent, like Rally, where it's either like tokens, like creator tokens, or it's about cards. So you can recognize your fan and they can have like an incentive or share revenue in some way. And you're starting to have brands also like that. So you have, for instance, Arfa or Nide in France, which are brands that are basically have their communities helping them build products, and they get a percentage of the sales. So it's not anymore like a one-off, but it's really a change in better incentives and alignment. And I think that's something interesting as well.
Do you think that's a trend just beyond the high cost of customer acquisition? Is that just like a marketing ploy, or do you think it's really a fundamental shift of how businesses might think of themselves and want to operate?
I think it's a fundamental shift. I mean, it's going to take time, but I think it's going to really, really change the way we buy, the way that the economy is structured. So yeah, I think it's a fundamental shift. Maybe not in 2021, like bam, it's happening, but in the coming years, yeah.
Have you considered starting your own company?
That's a good question. I have, but right now I'm still thinking about it. I'm pretty lucky. I have like several people that said, investors that said, if you launch your company, I will invest in whatever you create. Ultimately, I will. But I'm lucky enough to have a full-time job that I really, really like, and I help companies. So that's also, I mean, my job has meaning. It's not like a bullshit job. It's really something that I really like doing. I've really got some great work conditions. So if I didn't have a job I liked, I would have jumped into entrepreneurial much quicker. But I think it's still holding me in some ways because I like what I do.
If you were to start a company today, or in the very near future, what would you go into? What's the kind of standout opportunity that you see in the market, whether it be France or the global creator economy in general?
Well, the thing is, I've been writing for a lot of years and working on strategies, on go-to-market strategies. And so in a way, it's like intangible things. And I'd really like to launch something that is like physical, like a tangible thing, something. So maybe a D2C brand. And that's something I've been really looking into. So maybe, and like running a newsletter, you're seeing more and more now creators that do some merchandising. So maybe for fun, I would do something like that. But yeah, D2C brand, that's something I'm excited. I mean, it's not as easy as it seems, because like people often think of D2C, like a lot of people that launch D2C brands, like really like create a great website, great experience. But most of the time they overlook that the back end is much more complicated, and that's where really they should focus a lot of time. So people sometimes tend to forget that part, at least at the beginning, and then reality hits, bam, and so they realize that having a nice looking website is not enough.
But Shopify does make it easy, I suppose. So that's something.
Absolutely.
And so now I want to really move on to the information and content creation, because obviously there's so much content out there. How do you avoid being overloaded?
I have, I guess I'm a little bit biased because, well, at least, or maybe I have skills that most of the people don't have, because I spent 10 years in a media research institute and I was focused on the media monitoring expertise. So that's something I know, and I know how it works. And as far as I'm concerned, I'm really, really like, I'm not going to say strict approach, but at least methodical like approach, which is I have a Feedly, which I have around 200 or 300 media sources in there. So that's basically around, I'd say 6,000 articles per week. I review this Feedly twice a week. So that's each time around 2,000 or 3,000. And I've developed an expertise, which I call diagonal reading or focused curiosity, but I think diagonal reading is actually better. And I'm actually pretty good at it now, is like, I read all of them very quickly, like title and subtitles, for around 2 or 3 hours. And then I note, I categorize them. I've got different boards, and I will categorize them like, in-depth read. So I read something and I sense it's a good article. So I'm going to put it aside. And when I have time, I take the time to really read it in depth. Then I have some things when I spot some trends, like, the lottery thing I was mentioning. That's something I came across, which, as a matter of fact, it's not that I'm really interested into that, but I found it odd. And I said, there's something about it I don't know yet. So I have this specific board where it's like something interesting. I think I call it the AWW, like as in, I don't know what that is, but it's definitely worth like saving. And then I put some tags, if it's food related, if it's like blockchain or whatever and everything. And once I finish my sessions, I just like think for around 30 minutes. And I'm like, is there something that stood out? Like from all these media, is there one thing that really was like interesting or something? And I note like five or six signals, and then I go in depth. And sometimes I really find some interesting things, like, wow, I didn't expect this or something like that. So that's like my diagonal reading, because it gives me like an overview picture of what's happening. I'm not in my bubble, because I've got very different sources, different countries, and like I've got VC stuff, I've got tech stuff, I've got food stuff, I've got entertaining stuff, so I think it's a pretty good thing. And obviously I check my sources every 2 or 3 months. I add, I remove, and the ones I like best are on top. So that's the way I do my diagonal reading. And then I have my newsletters. I have around 20 or 30 of them, and I just in-depth read. And I use a tool that's called My Mind, and I save what is interesting so that I can find things I find interesting. So, at some point I was using Rome Research, but actually, since I'm someone that collaborates a lot with a lot of people, I like sending drafts, I like people adding stuff. I actually use Google Doc more than Rome Research now. And it's funny because sometimes I actually have conversations on my Google Doc. So I'm writing something, someone's checking something, and then we just start having conversation in comments. And I mean, that's the way I like to work, better than Rome. So I mean, it's probably not flawless, but I guess it's working pretty fine. And I mean, I'm a very curious person, so I probably read, I don't know, like 20 hours a week anyway. So I know I'm not like the conventional person.
Do you think that, so for you, and I guess for anyone who's trying to get more into the space and analyze, having a process, having a more methodological approach to it is the only thing that can really give you that edge?
Yeah, because if you don't have like a good process, you're gonna feel overwhelmed, like FOMO or FOM. I read this thing that would say it's not FOMO anymore, it's FOMG. It's like fear of missing out greatness, and I thought that was actually pretty funny. But if you don't have a process, then you're gonna feel like you're missing out on something. I know that basically, I mean, since my sources are good in media and I've got the best newsletters out there, I mean, I don't feel FOMO. Like it's very rare when someone sends me something I haven't seen. So, or at least I wasn't kind of aware. So now I'm fine. And that's why I think everyone should have like their process depending on their time and depending on what they're searching for.
And so just to kind of wrap up, what do you see the main challenge in this content curation process is for someone who maybe isn't going as in depth as you are? Where's the bottleneck for them?
I think that without going as in depth as me is like there are some really good curators out there. So if you're kind of like the lazy person or you don't have time, make sure to spot like the 4 or 5 people that have great curation. I mean, there are a lot of them. There's this guy, he's called Eitan Messica. He's amazing. I mean, I've rarely seen such a great curator. And I mean, basically, if I just read him, I think that would be enough because he looks into like, I think he subscribed to 50 or 60 newsletter. Yeah, he's mad. I mean, he's crazy mad, but like smart mad. And if I read that, I'm sure that I would have the big news. So yeah, just find those good curators. And I think there are a lot of tools around curation that are emerging. So things are changing. And I think that's something that will be taught in school. There will be courses on that, like these are like soft skills that are really, it's not really soft skills, but I mean, it's something that's getting very important. So tools are coming and things are changing. Saria Zoot is also building something around the creation space. There is Prakar, also a friend of mine that is building something very interesting around curation and also about curation becoming actionable. Because so far we have a lot of curation tools, but they are not actionable. The problem is you have someone sending you out like a newsletter, but sometimes you have this something you read, it's not relevant at some point, and then like 6 months later you're working on something and like you vaguely remember that on that newsletter you had something, and then you spend like hours searching for it and it drives you mad because you can't find it. That's why I save in MySpace. It doesn't happen anymore. I know I will at some point find it, but what you need now is for curation to be actionable. So I think everyone should have like a second digital brain. My second digital brain is like my mind, but it can be Notion, it can be Rome, and people should learn to like stock information and content in there because it's now a lifelong process. And when they need to get back to it, then they can find it. And maybe then have some tools like for spaced repetition that can help you assimilate what you've read. So again, creation is already there. What we need now is tools to help us make it more actionable. And I think people really need to build their like second brain framework. And at some point, I think people will also like sell their second brains. We're still starting to see that happening, like Nate Eliasson, Saria Zoot. And I mean, I think that's something amazing. I mean, I would definitely pay for like some people I read that I find really smart. I would pay to have access to their second brain.
So at the moment, who's your favorite creator that you're learning from?
Tough question. I'd say that in social media, my favorite is Darcy Kulikan. In like VC tech stuff, it's Saria Zoot. In like intersection of media and consumer, it's like Rex Woodbury. And yeah, I don't have other names, which is a pity because there are really some really smart people out there. But I mean, for people listening to me, I mean, drop me an email or tweet me and I'm sure I'll find it at that point.
Do you have a favorite writer at the moment or favorite book that you're reading?
I'm actually reading the book from Trent Hunter, Jeremy Getch, I think it's like on like future thinking or something like that. I can't remember the title. And I love it because I love everything that's trend related. Otherwise, I'm reading again Stefan Zweig, which is my favorite author. So yeah.
Thank you, Marie, for joining us and for your insights on content curation. Details on how you can follow Marie are in the description below. Join us next week on General Principles.